If I could share only one tip about studying the UK bar, it would be to write your notes for the litigation subjects in an order. Recently, I was on a panel at the UKEC Law Fair, and during that session, I was giving advice to students. And one thing often came up. This piece of advice I wanted to tell students because it really worked so well for me. This is to order your notes in such a structure as would mirror the litigation process. Knowing the order of your notes helps you understand how each step of the litigation process fits together. I will be using the civil litigation syllabus to illustrate this, although it works for criminal litigation as well. If you have a chance to read the White Books, Volume 1 especially, you would see the table of contents shows the order of the items, which in a certain order, and this order actually matches the litigation process. But one problem I noticed in our certain bar schools is that the bar school organizes its own internal syllabus that is out of line with the order of the white book and order of the litigation process as a whole. Therefore, I spend most of my BPTC time or BPC time, whatever you call it, time in bar school, organizing my notes to mirror the litigation process. This then had several benefits. Why I think this method works, and especially for a Malaysian like me, although it works for everyone of different nationalities and different ways of thinking. But just to use a Malaysian example, it's because Malaysians think in a step by step process. It comes from our education system that traditionally uses a lot of rote learning and memory retention, which has acclimatized our brain to take in information rather than contemplate the reason for the process. In other words, we like to see things in a structured manner for us that we know where to step. And most of the time, a lot of confusion comes from not knowing where one step of the litigation sits in the order of all steps. This is not to say that we do not think from a critical level. In fact, we eventually discover the reason for the process. But this usually happens during work experience or when we become practicing lawyers, which for most people is scarce at the stage when you're doing the bar. After all, the bar is supposed to prepare you for practical training. And so we're in a bit of a catch 22. Why I think then my method would help solve this catch 22 is because it gives you a semblance of how a litigation process would be. You may not know how it's actually like in courts, but by arranging your notes in a step by step structure, it becomes a process of your own. This method, I believe, is also useful for some of you who just want to get to bar school and practicing law is a thought for a future time, something you're not concerned about deciding now. And this will help you as well by getting you through this challenging fourth year academic course. I cannot take all credit for this method. This method actually came from Stuart Symes' Civil Procedure, a book that was recommended by my tutor, and I strongly recommend to you all as well. You can see me reading it in Castle Park in Bristol over there. Here is Symes' table of contents, and I'll paste the Google Books link below because it's quite small here. But the general idea here is Stuart Symes arranges the chapters of his book in almost parallel with the white book, although not exactly. He breaks off certain points to allocate more weight of detail to them. And as you will see, this is a way that I suggest making your notes as well. This is his interpretation of the litigation process, which does its best to mirror the white book's table of contents. Let's just take one chunk at an example that I think you can see. You can see this is from the table of contents of Stuart Symes books that chapter 7 begins with limitation, 8 issuing and serving proceedings, 9 renewal process, 10 service outside jurisdiction, although I put an NA there because it's not within the bar syllabus, 11 responding to a claim, 12 default judgment, and 13 statement of case. Let's look at the chapters relevant to these to these parts of the table of content, and I'll show you what I mean. when you're looking at this, you will start your natural logical thought process will be something like this. Assuming all of this, you had covered the topics in your tutorials already. So you know limitation period has to do with stopping an action from even beginning. So you would probably think we need to sort out the limitation period first before speaking of issuing and serving. And then you know issuing and serving the claim form is one of the earliest steps in commencing litigation. Um, and these are this would be something that you would think of. We need to think to issue this and serve the claim form and other documents. Yes, there were other points like renewal of claim form and serving of documents outside the jurisdiction. It's not needed for now, although it's in the future, yes. So if you're hardworking, you can look at it and try to think about why this exists, but by no means you're obliged to now, especially with the limited time. How does the other side respond to the claim? And this is where you start to think about why Stuart Syme allocated a response section to this book. Um, Fifthly, how is a default judgment relevant here? At this point, you may have just briefly looked at default judgment. You might know it's something to do um, with ending the litigation process. You're not sure how. Maybe as you do revision, you realize that it's when someone did not file an acknowledgement of service or defense within the specified time, and for that reason, a default judgment could be obtained by the other party. And then you might look at the chapter on statement of claims. You might be a bit confused here at first, like why does it just place statement of claims? After skimming through the chapter, you will figure out it is something to do with the information needed in each statement of claim. What necessary information needs to be there according to the civil procedure rules. This also gives me a good time to interject, and I would say a crucial first step when reading Stuart Syme's book and just any book is to skim read the chapter to know where everything is. I like to think of this like an analogy. Skimming is like knowing all the boxes in the storeroom where they are located so you can arrange it later. Eventually, you will form your own civil litigation master note. But before I get to this, I also do want to make one more point that is note in your textbooks. Some of you might think the white book is already so difficult to read. Why am I suggesting to read another book? This is because these books are intentionally written to make the studying process easier and will save time in the long run. Plus, by no means do you have to read every single chapter of the book. Part of the skill is also knowing what is relevant and what isn't, which I will happily dedicate another video to soon in the future. But for now, this book actually saves time. That's the gist of it. And this book is there to help you craft your own pathway. And this brings me to my next and final slide. That is to organize your notes in your own structure. You can see here a snippet of my Notion notes, which the broad screenshot of it was something I showed earlier. Here is a snippet of it. And in this snippet, you can see I arranged step one, step two, step three in my own order. I didn't follow Stuart Syme because by then, I would have read enough of his book, enough of the white book to construct an order which I think is sensible to me. I do caveat this order might not be what practitioners agree with, might not be what other students agree with, but it works for me. And after all, that is the purpose of your own legal notes, is to guide your own mind. I will indicate, however, where I borrowed from Stuart Syme, how mine links with his. If you notice, my step one is has there been any limitation periods that bar the action, and that is his that is his chapter 7 as well. And also issuing and serving the claim form. I put 2 and 3, or actually by that I mean 8 and 9. By that I mean 8 and 11. Sorry, issuing and serving proceedings and responding to a claim, as as under step 5, I put responding with issuing and serving together. Then default judgment, which was chapter 12 in his section, I placed under step 6 because I felt I wanted to deal with commencing proceedings under part 7 or part 8 first, and special rules for bringing claims against certain parties like infants somewhere before step 6. So I put what he would deem as step 12 step under my step 6. And finally, for step 7, statements of claims completed correctly, my content almost mirrors his, although he puts it at chapter 13. And some of you might be thinking here, I'm confused with all the numbers. Why are the orders different? For two reasons. Of course, firstly, this video is only focusing on one section, where there are other pre-action sections which Syme talked about in chapters 1 to 6, which I will dedicate individual videos to in the future. And these sections are processes that exist before the limitation period in Syme's mind. If you can see mine, I put application for court orders and court powers as some of the preliminary steps, I like to call them, and that is a more sensible way for me. And the second reason is is what mentioned earlier, and I now reiterate, is that your notes should be there for your own structure. And therefore I want to summarize everything by going to the first slide I said, which is to really know the order. This is the one tip I would have for bar students, especially Malaysian bar students, about to commence the bar exam. Thank you for listening to me, and like and subscribe.